All right, it's 2 o'clock. I'm going to get going. So today's webinar is Map Your Network in Clicks. Basically talking about automation options in netTerrain, graphical networks, netTerrain. So we are a graphical networks company. netTerrain is the software product that we sell, that we manufacture and sell. So I am the person at the bottom of the screen here, Jason Sherman. I'm do customer support. I do pre-sales, post-sales, various other things too. So I'm pretty well involved with day-to-day operations, and certainly know a little bit about our software. I won't say I know everything, because I think some of our customers probably know a bit more than me. But I will cover the topic of mapping your network and some automation things. So before I get going, I want to introduce a couple other folks that are here from the team, Adriana, Laura, and Tim Kim. I'm going to let Adriana start with her introduction.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Adriana, and I am the account manager here at Graphical Networks. I think we do have a couple customers on today, so thanks for joining us.
And I'm Tim Kim. I'm the account executive here at Graphical Networks.
If you guys have questions as we move forward, feel free to throw those into the Q&A section. There's a chat also, but I think Q&A is probably more appropriate for the questions. But if you don't get one or the other, it doesn't really matter. We'll keep an eye out for both. Moving forward, PowerPoint slides here, just have a few. We'll get into actual demo here in a minute. The agenda is just a quick overview. I got some poll questions to get out there. We'll do a demo, see netTerrain in action, answer any questions if anybody posted anything, and talk about discovering more if you want to learn more about netTerrain. So what's netTerrain? So as I mentioned, that's the software we manufacture. netTerrain software makes it easy to see and track what's happening in your IT infrastructure. So from data center to fiber networks, cloud resources, you can read all that. But what is it? It's network documentation, right? If you're a network person, at some point you're gonna decide you want to do some network documentation. Usually that starts with something like Visio, or just Excel spreadsheets, or maybe nothing. That's pretty common too. Kind of depends on the size of the network and maturity level as far as the network and things like that. But we are a piece of software that's really kind of meant to be used for network documentation. Other tools that are out there, something like Excel or Visio or whatever, they're great tools, great software tools, not really purpose built for network documentation necessarily. It's not, you can't use them, but this is kind of what we do. That's why our product netTerrain is around. That's what it's really for. Graphical networks. So we make the netTerrain software, consider user-friendly, visualization tool. So we have customers around the world, very large customers to very small, few rack type customers, things like that. So our software is not like you have to be a giant, huge company to use it. You can certainly be a very small IT group. You just want to do some documentation. Our software is very scalable from that standpoint. So see netTerrain in action. But before we do that, let me do the polling questions. Let me click on polls. I think they're loading up here, so we'll see if that actually happens. Load. While that's loading, I'm going to escape out of my thing there. Oh, here we go. So launch instant poll. Let me hit the check mark here. It says, which apps would you want to leverage? So when we say that, okay. You guys are seeing the polling questions. I don't know if I did it right. Sorry about that.
I'm not seeing them, Jason.
My bad. I hit
can
the
try
wrong button
from my
here.
end.
Nope, I'm hitting launch now. Sorry.
There it
User
goes.
error. All right. Okay. How do you document your IT? You can choose more than one. I think I missed one of the polling questions, so I might have to go back to it if I can, but let's start with this one. So I was talking about different tools, right, that you might be using in the poll. So like I said, I think you choose more than one and then hit submit. Spreadsheets and Visio, they seem to be the winners right now. We'll see if anybody else chimes in. Let me see if I can. We got some other tools and little to no documentation, so it always makes sense. All right, I'm going to close that poll and close out of there. And let me just go back up to this other one that I missed, see if I can start that one up. Let me launch this one. This is the one I meant to launch. Which apps would you want to leverage? So when we say leverage, I mean, if you have, are you using this tool? Does it have data that's sort of a source of truth? Would you want to use that information to build some network documentation from it? So there's just a few examples here, like ServiceNow, SolarWinds, Remedy, Azure. We actually do other integrations, but these are just a few that we kind of threw up there because they're kind of the more popular ones, I would say. ServiceNow, SolarWinds for sure. I mean, lots of people I talk to usually have SolarWinds in one flavor or form or another. So again, pretty good tools out there. So give you a second to respond to that. Azure, SolarWinds, ServiceNow seem to be the ones. That poll. Thanks for that. There's I'm just gonna hit the Q&A real quick. Yep. Okay. You were just mentioning where to drop questions, so that's good. On sharing my screen, what I'm showing right now is netTerrain. I'm gonna walk through some diagrams, talk about documentation a little bit, and then backtrack a little bit and talk about how do you get data into a system if you're doing network documentation. Most systems have ways of doing integrations and things like that. So I'll talk about sort of ours. So first and foremost, typical sort of network documentation project. It's usually something where you have a building with floors and rooms, or you have a data center and you want to map out the cabinets and equipment. Maybe you want to show connections and things like that, right? Not always the case, but certainly something you can do. Here, I've got actually, this is a little bit bigger scale because we're at a much higher level where I have a map, in this case, state of Maryland. We've got lots of lines here that represent connections, fiber, and conduit between different university campuses around the state. So I can zoom in and see different campuses, the primary one being Maryland here. If I double click and drill down, this is just an example project. This isn't real data per se, it's just made up because that's where I went to school myself many years ago. So when you're doing network documentation, right, you might show things like buildings and as I mentioned, other things like maybe even handholds or manholes. Now that's typically if you're doing like outside plant, you're going to do fiber cables and conduits. I think a more common thing, especially when you talk about something like DCIM, where it's more data center centric, would be something like a data center floor plan, like here, and then you've got multiple, in our case, multiple cabinets that are placed on top of the floor plan. So for us, we're very hierarchical, so you can start at a very high level and work your way down to a lot of detail. And you can show really kind of as built from the standpoint of, okay, if I have a cabinet, what's inside the cabinet? I mean, typical rack elevation stuff, right? Racks, equipment inside the racks. Where is it? Which rack unit is it in? So on and so forth. You have different pieces of equipment that you're going to be displaying in the cabinets. This particular cabinet actually has a front and a back to it, so you can place things on the back side or the front side, and so on and so forth. So devices for us are going to be we have ports for cards. I'm going to just turn off some links here for a second. So you're going to have ports. The green ones here happen to have connections. You're going to have slots for cards. You might represent power as well. So if you do want to show power connectivity, you can do that too. I'm going to turn on what's called the interdiagram connection here for a second. Devices are, again, you get into things like cards, chassis, PDUs, got some different cards inside this particular device. Again, you're seeing physical cables, connections. You might see connections down to port level. For instance, ports, these have strands connected to them, so fiber cable connections. But why am I showing all this and talking about all these things? Well, because when it comes down to a project like network documentation, whether it's Visio or Excel or whatever tool you're using to do your documentation, one thing you would like to do is leverage data that you currently have in your environment, right? So if you have data, let's tap into that data and use that information as best we can to document our network. So that's one thing you got to consider. The other is maybe you don't have documentation or it's more limited. Can we do at least automate or set up some sort of discovery process for getting data, capturing it and bringing it in to our network documentation solution, which may or may not be us. There's other tools out there, but those are the questions you're going to get into, right, and start to think about. And the third is, maybe it's just a bulk data one-time import kind of thing. Now, that's not automation from the standpoint of keeping things up to date all the time, but it is leveraging data you might have that you want to bring into a tool like ours and help you map your entire network, using something like Excel, which is pretty common, right? Most people, as was shown, Visio and Excel are pretty common tools to use. And Excel is a really good way to convert data from a data source like a database over to another system where you do a CSV import. But let me talk a little bit more about other ways and how do you deal with something like an integration. Well, for us, we have something called the netTerrain collector. It's on my screen. I'm going to move it around the screen for a second. This netTerrain collector is a tool. It's actually a standalone application, Windows-based, that runs on the server that you have netTerrain installed on, or it can be a separate machine. You might put it on your laptop or something and go do a discovery at a new, maybe a new company or something like that. But this has multiple connectors inside of it. So a couple of those that we mentioned and talked about, something like SolarWinds and ServiceNow. So SolarWinds, if I click on this, we have an API connection to SolarWinds. So most systems have REST APIs anymore. REST APIs give you the ability to integrate between systems. Most systems don't want to be closed anymore because people expect some openness of a system where you're putting your data into it. So you can get your data out or push data into it, as the case may be. So for us, we have a SolarWinds connector that you configure, and we will pull data from SolarWinds using their APIs. That data typically is going to be something like the devices that SolarWinds is discovering. SolarWinds usually does discovery, let's say, via SNMP. And if it's a source of truth, if it's data that you have that is like, oh, this is great stuff, then you want to be able to kind of refer back to it. I don't know if I have data in here or not. Actually, I do. So I have some SolarWinds node object data. The blue ones here basically I've pushed into my netTerrain project, but you can see some of the just devices that we've discovered there. So how does that, sort of help you again with network integration and mapping your network? Well, because you are leveraging data. We are discovering data out of a trusted source. in this case, SolarWinds. And then we're going to push it. There's a push button up here into netTerrain. So we get a network, some documentation, some objects, or at least the beginning of documentation from the data that's in that data source. Now, if you don't have SolarWinds, or you're coming off of Visio and Excel and you're like, well, what do I do? Well, the other way is sort of a standard, been around forever since probably networking began, which is SNMP. You can use that for discovery as well. I mean, really, SolarWinds and some of the other tools typically use that as the default mechanism, I think, anyway. So we do have a SNMP discovery agent tool built in as well. So you can configure that, go out and do a discovery, you do a scan. I won't have you watch me do a discovery because it's basically, well, you end up with something like this. You end up with devices in a table based on your IP address range or ranges that you've put into the system. So this data is going to get matched up or pushed into your netTerrain system. This is the netTerrain system. And the collector, you can set it up where you do a one-time push, or you set up a scheduler where it goes out and just pushes data on a regular basis. It can check status too. So it'll say, oh, is this thing responding every 5 minutes? And if it doesn't, then you set up a flag and say, hey, this isn't responding, status change down, that kind of stuff. So you can get into a little monitoring there as well, not to the extent of something like SolarWinds, but sort of a basic type of discovery. And well, discovery is good, more basic type of monitoring as needed. So you can do that. So what does it look like? You do a discovery or get SolarWinds data and that kind of thing. When you're talking about like discovery, SNMP, you end up with something like this. Usually it's not going to be laid out like this in the diagram. It'll probably look something more like this. But we have tools called the arrange tools where you can come up here and press different buttons to help lay out the diagram of information and data that you're collecting or discovering, right? So you end up with something more along the lines of this. I don't know, that one bend point seems to not like me for some reason. I'll bring this back down here. Let me get rid of that bend point. There we go. Bring this guy up here. All right, that's better. So here you've got different objects that are getting discovered and so on and so forth. The one thing about when you do integrations, one, again, trusted source of data. Hey, I'm going to go get this data again via SNMP or SolarWinds or ServiceNow or whatever that data source is. One, you know the data, right? You're familiar with it. You're already gathering that data. You're not trying to recreate the wheel and do things twice in your documentation. You're leveraging what you have. So you want to do that as much as possible, which is always can be a good thing, right? Once the data is in a tool like ours, network, documentation tool, then of course you can lay things out. You can move objects around in the diagram. You can also take these objects, move them to another diagram. So for instance, I could cut this completely from a diagram and choose to put it into a whole nother, building drawing, maybe a logical drawing, or maybe you're going to build out, a whole new cabinet. You want to document the cabinet. I'll just throw this down here. I'm going to double click on this guy here. Don't spend a lot of time on that. And you're going to move the device over into, this location. These are all reference objects, these other objects here, which we can turn off too if we don't want to see those. But if we do, we can keep those turned on. We can resize them. And now I'm using discovered information. I'm using that trusted data to help me document the network in different ways. Again, maybe it's a flat drawing I'm going to do where I have like here, or maybe I'm going to build out a physical diagram drawing where I have racks and things like that. With our tool, you decide what you want to do. You certainly don't have to do rack elevations. You might be like, nah, I just want to document what I have in these different systems, put them into some logical, more flat type drawings, and be able to just kind of maintain and keep that up to date. So we'll let you do all those things in the tool. You can have different connectors running or enabled at the same time. So if you're using like cloud tools like AWS or Azure, and you want to discover what's out there in your cloud, you can do that. Bring the data back into NetTerrain. There's a whole bunch of different pre-built connectors we have. We do have the ability to build these connectors using REST APIs from different products and tools. So just because it's not here doesn't mean you can't discover against that data source. We just need to know the data source. Typically, we look at the API guides and kind of go from there. But again, you can set things up where you set up a schedule where you're going to collect data on a regular basis. You're going to set up a discovery cycle and that kind of thing. So you can also enable polling, which means I'm going to try and do a sanity check on that device on a regular basis. So all good stuff. All this leads back again to discovering or mapping your network and integrating with the different tools that are out there. And that, I mentioned REST API. So yeah, typically you're connecting to something like a Remedy or a SolarWinds or ServiceNow type system that has REST API guides. But again, you could bring data from a data source, like a database even. You're not going to use REST APIs for that. We have other tools that allow you to connect to data sources. You have a table you want to connect and pull data from. And maybe you want to stay connected to that table because it's a system that's still getting data and updated on a regular basis because it might be a homegrown system, right? So we have tools that allow us to do that as well. And again, it may be just bulk import, where in that case, you're just going to do CSV kind of thing. So with that said, if there's any questions, let us know. Happy to discuss those. Let me see on my PowerPoint slides and see if there's any things that I missed here. There's a question that came in. I'm going to answer that in just 1 second. Yeah, just got a little more. Let me go back to the slides beginning. So let me scroll through this real quick. Oops. That up. But while that's going, let me go back to the questions because one had popped up. I want to make sure I get to it. Yeah, so the current things we typically discover, because this is layer 3 level network discovery, CDP, LLDP, I think there's more layer 2. We do look at IP tables, routing tables. I forget all the other tables. I won't say OSPF specifically. I can't speak to that myself, and we can look into it for you if you want to, or you can just try it out. You can do a discovery and see, but let me go into, sorry, let me just bring up the SNMP advanced. LDP, CDP, SSH neighbors, yeah, physical tables. Yeah, I don't see anything about that specifically, but we do, go to the routing table. Underground infrastructure, depends on what you mean. If you're talking about fiber cables and strands, pretty detailed. I didn't really focus on any of that because that's, not really necessarily talking about the APIs or the integrations. But if you want to see fiber cable, strands, all that stuff, feel free to reach out. We do a lot with outside plant, so we can certainly help you there if needed. Happy to talk to you about it. Or you can check out, if you go to demo.graphicalnetworks.com/demo, you can sign up if you want to try things out. But I'll put up the URL for that demo project I was just showing. You can go in here as a read-only user and see a lot of the stuff that's in here. I'll throw it in here. Oop, there you go. But if you navigate down this higher ed network, I should put a thing in there, University of Maryland. This particular map has information about the fiber conduits and so on. You may not be able to turn the layers on and off because it's read only, but typical stuff would be like a manhole. I'll throw that in the chat also. Should we get down to there? But inside the cabinets and getting into the detail of the fiber strands, splicing kind of thing. So yeah. No. Let's see if any questions. Let me take a look. I think that's it. I think we did pretty good on time here. Got you a few minutes back. Yeah. Reach out to, let me go back to my PowerPoint deck here. Reach out to sales, Adriana or Tim. Tim Kim at graphicalnetworks.com. There's a phone number up there, or go to our website. There's a chat button you can press if you got more questions, or if you want a more detailed demo based around sort of your requirements, let us know. You can certainly set up a call. So thanks everybody for your time. Really appreciate it. Stop my share now. And you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.